In the 4th century AD, the Eurasian steppe witnessed a period of arid weather pushing its nomadic peoples to fight and migrate for precious resources and suitable living space. And just as dominoes fall on one another, so too did the ancient peoples of Eurasia begin pushing west one after the other. The Huns crossed the Volga river by 370 AD, pushing other peoples like Goths further west as well. 5 years later, they crossed the Don River too. A year after that, a large group of Goths appeared at the Roman border asking Roman Emperor Valens for asylum. Eventually he accepted, but the Goths were treated so poorly, even forcing them to sell their own children for food, that it led to the Battle of Adrianople in 378, where the Roman army was struck one of its worst defeats ever. The Goths and other settled barbarians couldn't be forced to leave the empire, but neither would they be able to completely integrate. This eventually led to further conflicts down the road, even to the famous sacking of Rome by Alaric. But back to the Huns. At the beginning, they were far from united, instead migrating as individual clans, which were then followed by others after hearing of their success. By the year 400, the Huns have crossed the Carpathian mountains and settled on the Pannonian plain, knocking on the doors to the Roman Empire, who considered the Huns the fiercest of all barbaric warriors. They dominated the battlefield with their unrivaled horsemanship and terrifying composite reflex bows, which worked wonders on slower infantry-based armies. On the way, Huns allied with, subjugated, or assimilated many other barbaric tribes they came across, like Alans, Ostrogoths, Gepids and Herulians. Just like Alaric before, the Huns too would exploit rivalries between East and West empires and enter military service of either depending on the better offer. The first undisputed recorded king of the Huns, Uldin, controlled a confederation between the Pannonian plain to the mouth of the Danube River at the Black Sea. They were seen with a mixture of fear and opportunity as they were used to keep the rebelling and dangerous Gothic parties under control. Especially the Western army commander and de facto regent, Stilicho, came to appreciate the Huns. That is, until Uldin launched large raids into the empire in search of booty, livestock and prisoners. Uldin was not met on the field, but was bought off with a large bribe. The Huns didn't prevent Alaric's sacking of Rome and their subsequent departure into Gaul, be it due to the sudden expiration of their treaty or because Romans were unable or unwilling to pay tribute to them. To make sure the capital of the East, Constantinople, remained safe from the Hunnic threat, who began raiding closer and closer to the great city, the Romans built large ramparts, the Theodosian Wall. This remained to this day one of the biggest projects in the defense of a city. But even that was almost not enough. In 447, a large earthquake tore down the wall, leaving the city exposed. The Hunnic charge, however, didn't come. Another wall surrounded the city, that of sickness and germs, which repelled any invaders not immune or resistant to the European diseases. Romans tried to maintain good ties with Uldin and his successor through diplomatic missions, gifts and subsidies. They continued to petition Hunnic warriors for their military service. In 434, the crown was passed to brothers Bleda and Attila. They ruled together for 11 years, but, as it often does, rivalry and jealousy sprouted between the two brothers and their followers. In 445, Bleda died, supposedly in a hunting accident, but even classical sources suspected Attila. Perhaps it was a retaliation to an earlier attempt on Attila's life. Regardless, Attila was acclaimed as the sole ruler. During the time of Attila, the Huns were enemies, guided by their shamans in worshipping ancestral spirits. They revered the eternal blue sky Tengri. Under him, many Huns had Germanic or Iranian names. Within his diverse empire, perhaps about 20% could claim largely East Asian descent. Huns even settled many provinces of the Roman Empire, especially Pannonia, where they mixed with the local population. These were not enslaved, killed or banished, for they proved to be an important part in supplying and providing for Hunnic overlords and their military expeditions. It was not Attila's goal to destroy or conquer the Roman Empire necessarily. Most of all, he wanted to milk it for all the valuables and resources he could. Whether voluntarily or not, many found a better off life under Attila than their homes. In 449, Eastern Roman Emperor sent a delegation to Attila, which included a skilled diplomat, rhetorician, and historian Priscus. On his way, he encountered a man who spoke fluent Greek but wore Scythian attire. He revealed he was taken captive in a Hunnic raid, where his martial skill earned him his freedom, a Hunnic wife, and a place in Attila's circle. He felt no desire to return, despising the unjust and arbitrary enforcement of Roman law by its soldiers and officials, even if it was admirable in principle. Though punishments were more swift and cruel under Attila, they were impartial and he rewarded loyalty well, allowing the former Roman to rise higher than he ever could in Roman society. If the Huns 2 generations before Attila preferred to live on horseback and avoided enclosed rooms and houses, as a contemporary Roman source describes, Priscus describes passing settlements of large tents and timbered houses, which, in one instance, even included a bathhouse like one that could have been encountered in Roman military posts. Even stone, imported from the Roman Empire, was used for buildings. Jordanes, who quotes Priscus, gives us the best surviving description of Attila. He was a man born into the world to shake the nations, the scourge of all lands. He was haughty in his walk, rolling his eyes hither and thither, so that the power of his proud spirit appeared in the movement of his body. He was indeed a lover of war, yet restrained in action, mighty in counsel, gracious to supplicants, and lenient to those who were once received into his protection. He was short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head. His eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with grey, and he had a flat nose and swarthy complexion showing the evidences of his origin. One of the most noticeable features of the Huns was their elongated head, a result of artificial cranial deformation. There is no definite conclusion for why this was practiced. Perhaps the Huns saw it as a means in pursuit of ideal beauty, or perhaps it was a distinguishing mark for a privileged group of people. Such custom would also become common with Germanic peoples influenced by the Huns. The process of binding the skull began right after birth, before a skull completely ossified. The head was bound across the forehead and nape, the gentle but consistent pressure directing the skull to grow primarily upwards and become elongated. But back to Attila. Jordanes further describes how Attila remained modest in his attire and habits, instead using any gained riches to reward his followers. He controlled his subjects with his charisma and the ruler's confidence, but also with fear and unforgiving nature. He demonstrated his position of power by letting his guests wait a long time to be accepted and to give them his final answer after a long diplomatic meeting. During such meetings and banquets, he often punished criminals in front of his guests, most often with crucifixion and impalement. Attila also possessed a strategic mind. He was careful in timing to attack the Eastern Roman Empire, be it for supposed breaking of existing treaties or otherwise, but also militarily supporting the Western Empire, with which he maintained good relations, especially due to his friendship with its supreme commander Aeetes. From the east, he also extorted a vast sum of gold, feeding Hunnic prosperity and war machine. The year 450 was a crucial year for Attila. The Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius died, and his successor broke off tribute and treaty with Attila. The furious Hun, however, turned west instead. The main cause was the Western Emperor's sister, Honoria, who sent Attila a letter requesting assistance and to invade in her name. It is unclear whether this message was meant just as that, or if Honoria implied or even offered marriage to him. Regardless, the latter way is how Attila interpreted it. With this, he would have to be given a large portion of the Western Empire as dowry. After failed negotiations, Attila began preparing for war. Attila had other ambitions besides marriage though. His direction towards Gaul shows that he was also interested in reinforcing and spreading his influence over the region and its peoples. Attila's march ended with defeat, bordering on catastrophe. The Battle of Catalaunian Plains in 451 ended with the victory for Romans and their Germanic allies. They were, however, unable to pursue retreating Huns due to the large number of casualties, and Attila's forces were able to return east. However, the losses, lack of loot and loss of prestige threatened the existence of Attila's hegemony. The solution? Well, Attila decided to immediately launch a new offensive to regain what was lost and what they were denied of in the first campaign. This time, they would march straight into Italy. This campaign, while less famous than its preceding one into Gaul, still proved highly influential. No source reports about the size of the Hunnic army, but we can assume it had a similar structure, though smaller in size than the first one. Meanwhile, the Romans couldn't count on the assistance of their Germanic allies. In the spring 452, Attila marched from his camp in the Pannonian plain. They were in a rush, as even people of Italy expected their arrival in Fear already a year earlier. Attila therefore prioritized speed over large-scale raiding along the road into Italy. In northern Italy, the inhabitants supposedly abandoned any hope for defense. Other details about what happened to the people and cities on the way are hard to determine. There are no details in contemporary sources, while medieval sources and local folklore remain unreliable. Meanwhile, archaeological artifacts that could be connected with the Huns could also be related to other occasions Huns were present in the area or were used by Germanic peoples or even Romans. What can be determined though is that after the year 452, the continuous existence of many Roman cities and most lowland settlements are archaeologically impossible to prove, such as Emona, Selleia and Petovio. The barrier of Claustra Alpium Iuliarium, which never really stopped invading armies from the east, failed this time as well. The first large resistance Hunnic force came across was Aquileia, one of the most important cities of the empire. Many conquerors before lost or were delayed here long enough to ultimately fail in their conquest. Maximinus Thrax lost his throne and his head during the turbulent crisis of the 1st century. This time Aquileia fell after months of besieging, in the final try after Attila almost gave up. A big role played Roman prisoners of war who helped build siege engines. Aquileia was not only ransacked but completely obliterated and literally burned to the ground. The fall of Aquileia and other cities of northern Italy enabled the rise of Verona, Tarvisium, Forum Iuli and, in long term and most importantly, Venice. The Huns continued their offensive. The Italic cities, scared by the Aquileia example, offered little to no resistance and surrendered en masse. There is a story that when Attila took the imperial palace in Mediolanum, he saw a painting or a mosaic of two Roman emperors sitting upon golden thrones and barbarians submitting or lying dead before their feet. These barbarians were most probably Scythians, one of the preceding nomadic groups of Eurasian steppe, who Attila could have interpreted as his ancestors. Whatever the case, it spited Attila to the point he ordered the painting to be fixed by portraying himself on the throne with two Roman emperors submitting to him and pouring gold at his feet. Afterwards, the campaign got into trouble. Despite the vast amount of plunder, the army couldn't gather a big enough of supply of food, as the region was plagued by hunger already 2 years prior. Together with the lack of clean drinking water, illnesses started to erupt among the soldiers. At the same time, help from the Eastern Roman Empire arrived by attacking Attila's lands in the Pannonian plain, and Attila's army also began to suffer defeats. Just like Alaric before him, Attila wanted to march straight on the city of Rome, the jewel of the ancient civilization, but was dissuaded by his advisors, who warned of Alaric's death soon after his sacking of Rome. All of these factors pushed the Hunnic host into retreat, but the final push came in the form of a diplomatic embassy led by none other than the Pope Leo I, who apparently impressed the Hunnic king. He agreed to terms that were very lenient for the Roman side. Attila would immediately cease all hostilities and return back across the Danube River. He was satisfied with merely a threat that he would return if the Western Roman Empire would fail to fulfill its obligation of marrying Princess Honoria to him and giving him a large chunk of land along with her. No additional terms were recorded, though it is probable that Attila managed to negotiate another tribute for himself. On their way back, the Huns were troubled with the falling morale due to supply issues, transport difficulties with loot and prisoners, as well as sickness, perhaps malaria or some local disease the Huns weren't resistant to. After Attila's return, he tried to strengthen his fracturing ties with Germanic peoples by marrying a Germanic princess, Ildiko. Though he officially married 3 times, he probably also had many concubines. He died on the wedding night, perhaps murdered, but more probably because of a stroke or burst of a blood vessel, causing him to drown in his own blood. His death marks the beginning of the end for the Hunnic Confederation. As he had many sons and never tackled the issue of succession, the candidates began fighting amongst themselves. The civil war gave Germanic tribes vassalized to the Huns a chance to break away. The surviving pretenders and Hunnic armies either returned east or entered into the service of either Western or Eastern Roman Empire. They would also play part in the following decades and centuries when more groups migrated from the east into Europe, their last hurrah joining the Avars in 559. Unlike the Germanic tribes, the Huns never entered into treaties with Rome as a weaker or subservient unit. Instead, they acted as an equal or even stronger party that was dictating the terms of their relationship. At their peak, the Hunnic army was unbeatable. They were, however, unable to penetrate some highland forts and more complex defensive systems, like Constantinople. They also possessed no navy, which limited their supply and expansion capacity. While it is easy to see the negative consequences the Huns had on the declining Roman Empire, There were also some positive outcomes. By subjugating Germanic and other tribes along the Danube River, the Huns have effectively stopped their migrations into the Western Roman Empire and arguably postponed its fall for almost half a century. However, those that were already beyond the border, already scavenging across the Western Empire, were now in an even stronger position to create their own states over the dying empire. If you want to learn about Alaric and how his army ravaged Rome for the first time in centuries, check out the next video. Be sure to like, subscribe, you know how YouTube works, and I'll bring you more history soon.